Pasindya, after the Indian War of Independence, was a dying man. They failed an invasion of their much weaker neighbor Afghanistan, and had to sign a humiliating peace where, although technically victorious, practically Pasindya lost the war. In World War II, they would try one more time. One last chance of restoring their empire. Unsurprisingly, they failed miserably, and Pasindya was reduced to nothing more than an old Empyrean client state, serving as a buffer between India and the old empire. But what if Pasindya was actually victorious in World War II and managed to restore their empire? And what if they went even beyond that? What if Pasindya conquered the world? Join me on a journey across 3 episodes as we explore the lore of a world where the Pasindyan Empire returns after World War II. Welcome to the world of Indus Rex. Now, an obvious starting point for a Pasindyan victory in World War II is having Pasindya win the Indian War of Independence, but I would disagree. A Pasindyan victory would just simply restore the nation to its pre-war oligarchic system. A system that simply couldn't last in a post-WW2 world. Also, if Pasindya wins, they could either side with their fellow colonizers and give the Europeans yet another advantage over Pasindya, or join the anti-colonial movement, but having to give up their own colonies as a compromise. And an oligarchic Pasindya without colonies could never last. So I will instead diverge the timeline in post-independence India, as in this timeline the federal government refuses to give the southern provinces their independence. This in turn causes more oligarchs to demand their sovereignty, as they start to fear that the federal government will take their power away. Eventually, this will result in the oligarchs remaining in charge of their respective provinces whilst the federal government has very little power, similar to how the Russian League functions in the modern day. Moving to Pasindya itself, you may think that Pasindya will steamroll Afghanistan, but you would be wrong again. In our timeline, radical elements in the government attempted to overthrow the remaining oligarchs in a coup, after Pasindya's horrible performance in Afghanistan. In our timeline, the war ended before the conspiracy took effect, taking away with it a lot of the support the conspiracy had. After all, the war was over anyways, and it couldn't be changed anymore. Yet if the radicals are more urgent, I believe that the coup could have largely succeeded. As Afghanistan pushes all of the Pasindyan forces out, the radical government agrees to a ceasefire with Afghanistan as they consolidate control of the nation. The radicalists declare the Second Pasindyan Empire and form a fascist government, the first of its kind. The main leader of the conspiracy, a man by the name of Baucharan Du, declared himself the dictator of the Pasindyan Republic. After this, he sent the military to Java, who was invaded and re-annexed into Pasindya. Borneo, Sumatra, and Malacca all fell to the Pasindyans. Only West Papua was safe, as they sought protection from China. Following their rapid victory and their new fascist government, Pasindya was quite isolated. As such, they sought new allies, and a few nations responded their call. One of the first nations to work with Pasindya was Korea, who sought to restore their empire as well. With Pasindyan aid, they steamrolled Amur and Siberia, annexing both into their empire. The Korean Northern War, as it would later be called, became a repeat of the Indian War of Independence in the way that many volunteers would join both sides. Eventually Korea was victorious and declared themselves a new empire. After this, they would annex Japan quite easily. The second nation to answer Pasindya's call to arms was Russia. Although Pasindya still held a grudge against Russia for the First World War, they soon realized that they needed to cooperate if they were going to win the coming war. Also, from the Russian perspective, the Pasindyans proved to be a more reliable ally than the old empire, as the Russians feared that the old empire would drag the Triangle Alliance and the Dutch Empire into the war at the same time. Also, the Russians were well aware that the old empire would form a threat to Russia after the war. Therefore they welcomed the Pasindyans into their alliance, kicking the old empire out. In the West, the Dutch were very cautious of the Russian expansions. They demanded that the Triangle Pact join the Dutch in an intervention into Russia, but the Triangle Pact refused, seeing the Russians as historical allies following World War I. This caused the Dutch Empire to align more to the old empire, who felt betrayed by the Russians. In turn, the Triangle started to support Russia more, seeing the Hague-Baghdad axis as an anti-Russian alliance. In this very cursed timeline, the Old Empire and Dutch Empire are united against the Triangle Alliance and Russia. The third and final nation to answer Passindia's call was the Republic of Brazil. The Republic would come into conflict with the Spanish-American Company multiple times, and its weak economy and infrastructure made the nation a horrible place to live in. Passindia supported a fascist candidate in the Brazilian election, who propagandized the alliance with Passindia as a new age for Brazil. The fascists would be victorious and Brazil would be the third nation to fall to ultranationalism, after Korea also got themselves a fascist leader. The Brazilians would undergo a debt-fueled militaristic build-up, and after a few years the Brazilian army matched that of the Italian Union, France, Slovenia, Greece and Catalonia, aka the entire Triangle Pact minus Spain, combined. Inspired by this, Passindia did the same thing and greatly expanded their military. Going against the Treaty of Rome, Passindia would remilitarize its border with the Old Empire. The Old Empire would demand that Passindia step down, but Russia warned that if the Old Empire tried to stop Passindia, they would declare war. The Netherlands would then support the Old Empire in enforcing the Treaty of Rome, after which the Old Empire moved into Passindia, and Afghanistan joined too, fearing the Passindian build-up. This would be the start of the Second World War. The Dutch and the Old Empire would quickly invade into Russia, after Poland joined the war on the Dutch side. Russia would utilize trench warfare to prevent their capitulation. Brazil made landings in Dutch Rhodesia and moved into the countryside, completely surprising the Dutch. Hoping to turn the tide of the war, the Old Empire would convince the Indian Federation to join, yet with the division between the oligarchs India could do little, and Passindia invaded without much opposition. Passindia would quickly move into the Old Empire, Afghanistan, and also invade Madagascar and Australia. Then, the Triangle Pact joined the war to help Russia out. North America would be cut off from the rest of the Dutch Empire, and after 5 months, the Old Empire capitulated, and the Dutch followed soon after. Passindia had won World War II. In the peace treaty, the Old Empire was fully partitioned, and Passindia gained the most amount of land. Crete was restored, and annoyingly to the Russians, the Pontus Strip was turned into a Ukrainian state by Passindia. Rhodesia was given to Brazil, Alaska was returned to Korea, India was returned to its rightful rulers, and the rest of the Dutch Empire was partitioned by the triangular powers. After this victory, relations between Passindia and their former allies in Russia and the Triangle Pact quickly deteriorated. The Passindians would once again shop for new allies. Brazil and Korea came back for Season 2, but this time there was also a new nation on their team, Hibernia. The triangular powers as well as the fascist bloc were both committing horrible crimes within their borders, and Hibernia loved to see both of their enemies destroy each other. The major issue was that the Triangle Pact was sitting right along the border of Hibernia, and Dublin wouldn't mind pushing these borders back a bit. Therefore the Hiberno-Passindian Cooperation Treaty was signed. In Asia, China's export-led economy collapsed after a drought hit the country. With the agricultural sector eliminated, the government hastily organized an industrialization program to try and get the economy running again, but this only worsened the situation as there were not enough wages to pay the workers, and thus the workers went on strike. The Chinese government collapsed, and sent a cry for help to Tibet, who moved in and set up a temporary government. Although Tibet was a very stable nation, it could not occupy China forever. With hostile powers surrounding them on all sides, Tibet and its sphere aligned themselves to the triangular powers. The Passindians were very much ready for war, but they wanted to secure their northern flank first, hence they invaded Central Asia. After their victory, Baucher and Do declared the birth of the Greater Passindian Empire. The next step of Passindia's plan called for the invasion of Vietnam, to reclaim the lost Malay Peninsula and also to create more room for the Passindian people. The people that in the eyes of the Passindian government were chosen by God himself to rule over all the other peoples. The Passindian navy surrounded the coast of Vietnam. Vietnam immediately surrendered to Passindia, and ceded the Malay Peninsula back to Passindia. Vietnam hoped that this would stop Passindia from conquering them, but they would be wrong. Only 24 hours after ceding the peninsula, Passindia captured the capital of Vietnam, and the Vietnamese government surrendered. The war would shock the world and expose the true motives of the Passindian regime. When the Koreans next threatened war with Tibet, the Triangle Pact put their foot down and declared that war with Tibet meant war with the Triangle Pact. Korea would call their bluff and declared war on Tibet. However, the triangular powers were not bluffing, and only 10 years after the end of the Second World War, the third had begun. Thank you all for watching. This video is only part 1 of 3, and the next parts will come out soon. I intend to make Indus Rex a complete alternate history universe instead of just another scenario. But for now, this is the end of part 1 of the world of Indus Rex.